in there to consider the white-black issues and stuff with the other variables. And you do some testing of that and see what you get. But the problem there was you couldn't really depend upon the black data to really be giving you that much information, because compared to the white data, it was so much smaller. So we did something different, and we did this in the paper. We did the analysis on the white subjects, the 609, and then we applied it to the model that we got to the black data to see if it fit the black data. And if it didn't fit the black data, then we'd say, well, something wrong. It's got to be something else other than these variables that we put in the model. And if it's something else, and the variables we're putting in there are the standard ones, like blood pressure, cholesterol, it's got to be something else that's maybe social or something like that.
Right.
So that's what came out of that paper.
Interesting.
So there was a lot of interesting things there, and we had a good time talking about it. This has come up again recently. I was at a CDC meeting, and somebody had a similar situation with a completely different data set. A lot of one group and a little bit of the other group. Should you combine them, or and I said, well, there's this paper we wrote in 1971. I'll give it to you. You want to look at it?
Yeah.
They might be using it. I don't know. So that was history of that.
Yeah.
So did you work on other things with John Castle?
Well, not that much, because the way my salary was being covered was, I was teaching second level, I was teaching first level and second level biostatistics. Not epi. We didn't start that until after you came. Eventually we started that because of Hal and all, pushing Larry and I on this thing. So I was teaching at least 2 courses.
Was it 287? Does that?
Well, I started teaching 287 a couple of years after I was teaching 145 and 105. So there was a year where I was doing these 3 courses.
Oh.
And 287 was a course that Bernie Greenberg had been teaching for years, and it was something called, it was an epi-bios combination. Can't remember what it was called. And Bernie did the whole course before, but he dropped out because he was no longer the dean. He dropped, and then what's his name, Michelle Abraham, became the dean. And so I was asked to do the course, but there was an epidemiology part of the course that had to do with the outbreak of something, and some data, and there was a whole part which had to do with analyzing outbreaks and stuff like, which I had never done. So I said, I'll do the statistics part of the course, but we've got to get somebody else to do it. So volunteer, they tried to get somebody to volunteer, and the person who volunteered was Carol Hogue. So Carol Hogue and I were the co-instructors of this course, which we taught for 2 or 3 years.
This would have been in the mid-'70s, actually.
Mid-'70s.
When Bernie was still dean.
Yeah, maybe Bernie was still dean. I'm not sure. And it was an interesting experience because Carol hadn't taught before. And Bernie hired Carol because, he said, if the epi department can sort of more or less hire me to do their statistics, why can't the bios department hire somebody in epi to do the epi stuff? Well, it turns out Carol she didn't have a lot of experience teaching, and she wasn't pleasant in class, and the students didn't like what she was doing.
Yeah.
And eventually, when I got up there to teach, they were so happy.
Yeah.
When Hal got up there, when she got up there to teach, it was sort of like, and I hate to say this because she just got this big award that didn't represent what I saw her do. But she was the co-teacher of it, and it turned out the course worked out all right, And I don't know who eventually taught it, but eventually what's his name, Hal came back. And we started working on epi methods. And so that's when we brought in Epi 268, which was a course that dealt with what's in the epi methods book, the epidemiology research book.
So I've been looking through old reports from the department.
Yeah.
There was apparently an Epi 268 that Al Tyroller taught before yours started. Does that ring any bells at all?
What's an Al Tyroller?
Well, Al Tyroller.
It was an Al. It was Alan Wilcox. No, it wasn't Alan Wilcox. It was Alan
Smith?
Smith.
But he was teaching it?
He and I taught it for 1 year.
Before you took on the 268 with Larry?
We called it 268. Or we called it something. I don't know. We called it
Well,
something.
see, I thought that's what 287 was. Well, maybe while you continue talking, I'm going to look on my computer.
Maybe Alan decided to do 287 by himself. I'm not sure. But the course that was the first version of 268 was a course I taught with Alan Smith because Larry wasn't ready to do that. And Alan Smith was there on a year or two leave or sabbatical or something. And he wanted to do it. And he was totally anti-Mietnan. He hated Mietnan. And so every time he got to talk about something that was a Mietnan thing, he would be putting it down and leave. So it was sort of hard. The course didn't, I'm trying to do the best I can. I'm not trying to put anybody down, just trying to teach what makes sense. But Alan would teach what he thought made sense, but then he would put Mietnan down. And it still went well, and I learned stuff. I learned stuff from Alan, But he left. And then we said, well, what are we going to do? And so, I got Larry involved and Hal was involved. So Larry agreed to co-teach it with me. So then it became Epi 268 from 1980. And you were the second TA. The first TA was Hal.
Yeah.
You were the second TA.
Yeah.
For that course.
I remember you and Donna Craigle, I think it was.
And Donna Craigle. You and Donna Craigle. Right. And then it had a long
But I wasn't in the same
that.
league as Hal. I wasn't in the same league as Hal.
Yeah, well, we know, but Hal was working day and night.
Yeah.
He used to say something like, "I don't have time to go to the bathroom."
Yeah, he's driven.
He was driven, and so we eventually, taught the course together. We wrote the book. Now the book, very successful book. It wasn't easy to do because when Hal was asked to write the first 2 chapters on epidemiology methods. It would be sort of like on what was in Epi 160 or the more advanced version of that, but it was sort of Epi 160 stuff. And Hal wrote what his 2 chapters. Each chapter was 150 pages long, and every line had 10 references. And so we had this big argument. I said, I can't, I don't know what to do because I can't put that in. Our chapters were smaller. And what do you got?
This is the annual report from 1975-76 from the department.
Yeah.
You see the course list?
Epi 240. Tyrola, Epi 268.
So maybe
Well,
this
it
is
could have
fake
been
news.
they put his name on it.
Yeah.
Oh, so this was this would have been
What year was that?
spring 76. This was the 1975-76 report. So I guess this would have applied to spring 76.
He could have done something, but I don't know what he did.
So when did
When
you?
Alan Smith was there, I thought it was 77, 78, or 79, or something like that.
Could it have been something in existence before that? Maybe.
It was before the year after I taught it with him. Then Hal taught it with me. I think we only did it 1 year. We might have done it 2 years, but I think it only was 1 year because I only think he was there for 1 year.
Yeah, Alan Smith, I would think.
Yeah.
I wonder if that was after this year. I don't know. It says Epi 268, Advanced Methods in
Well, I don't know what
Tyrola.
Viola.
So-
Yeah.
Viola couldn't really teach the statistics part of it, but he could have made it into an Epi.
Well, it says
160
Advanced
paper.
Methods, and I wonder if it was something
Yeah.
other than the
He could have
statistical
done-
methods.
I don't know.
Okay, I
I
just
don't
wondered
know
if you did know
I don't know
about
what that was.
Okay.
And then Hal and I, and then we taught the 168 for the 268 from 77 or 70. You got there in 77, 76, 77 through the mid 80s, and it's still there. And it's still called 268.
No. The university renumbered all the courses
Oh, okay.
about 10 years ago, so it's 715 now.
Oh, okay.
And Charlie Poole has been teaching it for
and he teaches his way.
a couple of generations. Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, but then near the end of my stay there, it then became necessary to expand 268 because there were all these things that weren't covered in 268 that needed to be covered, that were new advances. And one of them was survival analysis. So we changed the course and added survival analysis and split up 268 so that there was still more on logistic regression in the second course. And then a survival analysis, and I don't remember what else we did, regression diagnostic, collinearity and stuff, that we added other stuff in there. So
That was 269.
That was
right?
269.
Now, when did that
Which
get
is
started?
now our EPI 750. It's sort of, we have an EPI, we have two EPI courses, one of which is like logistic regression and the other is survival analysis, and the other one is more like correlated data.
So when did do you remember, we should get the years, so there was, in 77, spring 77, was that the first time you taught with Hal and Larry? I mean, the 268? I took it in spring 78, and I remember the auditorium
You
was...
must have taken it when Larry and I had to be teaching.
The two of you were teaching it, and each class would begin, you'd hand out your draft of the chapter for the textbook, each class. And the room was filled in the back with people who took it from you the year before, who wanted a second try at learning the material. So did it start in spring 77, or did it actually start in spring 76? Okay, my guess is it was spring 77, but I can probably find
Might have
that
been spring.
somewhere.
Actually, I don't know when.
I mean, it was a spring course, I remember that.
It was a spring course. And here it's been a fall course, but
Okay.
for
So
25 years here it's been a fall course.
So you taught it in the spring for years. When did 269 come online?
Well, it came online about a year or two before I took my sabbatical, where I went to Australia for 2 years.
And when was that?
And that was 1989 and 90.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I taught it in 88, well, fall of 88, fall of 89, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
One of those.
Before your sabbatical.
Before the sabbatical. I taught it once. And then we had my TA during that time was a woman who eventually got a PhD. I was going to be her advisor, but I left. So Joanne, what her name?
Joanne Garrett?
Joanne Garrett, yeah. And I think she actually took it over
Mm-hmm.
and taught it the next couple of years because nobody else could teach it.
Mm-hmm.
See? And then when I came back to teach that, but then there was also need to do a correlated data course. So eventually what I started to do, I think I stopped teaching that course because we got somebody else to teach that course. And I don't know if it was Joanne Garrett. It could have been, we had a woman named Rachel, I don't remember what her last name was. She was
Rachel Royce?
Rachel Royce. I think she taught.
She took over 268.
She took over 268. I'm not sure if she took over 269 or maybe Joanne kept doing it. But eventually, the 269, I mean, when I came back in 1971, the end of 71, I came
Wait,
back.
you mean 91?
91. I came back in 1991. Then I was teaching BIOS 145. I was still doing that. They still needed that. Somebody was already teaching 268. There were other people. David Strogatz was teaching it. Harvey Checkaway was doing some of that. And maybe they were involved in the 269 part too. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But eventually I did BIOS 145 and I did this EPI, whatever it was called.
Correlated data.
Correlated
course.
data.
Was GEE? Were you using GEE?
That was GEE. Yeah, that was introducing GEE.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first year, year or two. And I was only back in Chapel Hill for 2 years when I left to come here.
Mm-hmm.
Which I started teaching it here. But I was teaching it in a slightly different format because the course that we have, our program, has you learning some things up to correlated data so that I could start with correlated data from the beginning. I didn't have to do logistic regression or a whole bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
to review that. So that's what the correlated data course starts right into correlated data examples and stuff like that.
I want to think about your time, because your party is at 4,
Yeah.
and you want some time before the party.
Yeah.
So it's now about 3:10.
Okay.
I'm not sure how much time you want, but I want to be sure that we give you enough time for you to prepare, and the other is that if there are things that you really wanted to talk about that we haven't covered, that we save some time for that. So
Okay.
in terms
Well,
of
let's make sure we finish. We can finish in 15 to 20 minutes
okay,
if we can.
yeah, we surely
Okay.
can.
Now, I'm not sure where to go with all this, but you see, one of the things it's interesting that I gave this talk and I sent you the lecture.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have it.
I haven't had a chance to. No, I had my own lecture to prepare.
Right. And I gave this talk here, which I also gave it at UNC about it the year before, because there was a special thing about teaching, and they invited me to
Celebrating teaching.
celebrating teaching to be the plenary speaker or something like that. So I did this, and then I did it the next week here, and it was recorded, and it was really one of the best talks I ever gave. It was all about my history as a teacher.
Yeah,
how
that's
I
what I
started,
remember. Yeah.
and how I got to do this and that, and then went to there, and eventually got to active epi, and how I eventually worked through all these different types of things to get to where active epi was. And about 2.5 months ago, I got an email from 3 people, one of whom is Lisa Sullivan, you may know the name, who's a biostatistics head in BU, but the other one is Sandra Galea.
Sandra Galea.
Galea.
Mm-hmm.
And another one, you may know the name, is from Erasmus, who now is the head of the department at Harvard, who I went into Erasmus many years to teach there. Those are the 3 editors of this book. It's called Teaching Public Health. So they asked me if I'd be willing to write a chapter. And they asked me if I was willing to do it, and they gave some deadlines and stuff like that. And first, the outline wasn't due until October 1st. And the chapter was due December 1st. But I'm about to retire. And I didn't want to be working on that in October and November. I want to retire and get that off my chest. So in July, I wrote the chapter. And I wrote it based on the talk I gave. That you got the copy of, okay? But the talk was in 2012, and since 2012, I've done a few more things. And one thing I've done is I've done Active Epi Web. See, in 2012, I had just done Active Epi CD-ROM, but had to change to Active Epi, so I had to explain that and what the difference is. Active Epi Web is free to anyone, anywhere in the world. And there are now 8,500 people that are signed up for it in over 100 countries.
Wow.
You know, and it's free, so I don't get any royalties for it, and it's my gift. You know, and I actually paid over $65,000 to get a software company, to change the CD-ROM to the web thing.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time on it too, because I needed to get it done, and you just don't get grants for this thing. This type of thing. So I got it done, and it's being used. So that's sort of what I'm, in my chapter that I wrote for them, that was near the end of the chapter. But the whole chapter that I wrote was sort of like a personal history that I was talking to you about, how I proceeded from where I was when I started in biostatistics, or even a little bit with my background, you know, and going through how I gradually got to Active Epi Web. Starting with, you know, originally, I mean, you might say this is sort of not meant to be funny exactly, but in a way I sort of invented the handout. Because most of the time when you go to a class, back in those days, especially a statistics class, the teacher comes in, he writes the stuff on the blackboard.
And
you take notes on
That's
it.
right.
He says a few things
That's
about
right.
it. You're lucky if you can figure out what he says.
Right.
And then you just go off and then you try to learn it.
Right.
Well, that bothered me. Okay. So shortly after I started teaching, I said, well, I'm not going to they need something else. So I put together before each class, and I had to work on it, what later became PowerPoint presentation, but I put together a handout that I would talk on, so they didn't have to write all that down.
Yeah, right.
And they could listen to me.
Yeah.
So did I invent the handout? I mean, not
You
really.
can't.
You know,
Well,
but
I
in a
don't
sense,
know.
that was a contribution to active teaching because
Yeah.
it got them to be listening. So that was the first part of my,
Yeah.
in the first part of my chapter. Well,
Yeah.
it wasn't in the first, but the first part of my chapter had to do with the fact that I had to teach epidemiology to biostatistics to people who didn't want to be there. And so how do I make that happen? And I had to dress different. I had to be more relaxed. I had to be nice in there. I had to try to take examples and had to make examples interesting. So that was the Woody Allen part, where I'm making it more active, but I'm not developing multimedia materials. I'm just trying to do something that's active teaching.
Right,
How to
right,
make the
right.
students more active. And then I started to get into, okay, how can I make some of the materials I'm teaching better? And one of the things that always happened in the first course was teaching probability. And teaching probability in the first biostatistics course always got people nuts because they hated it. And they always people taught it in some way learning about permutations and combinations
Right,
and
right.
different questions on how to solve these problems,
Right.
and you hated the thing and you hated the course. You didn't want to be any part of it,
Yeah.
So what I did was I said, I'm going to come up with a way of teaching probability that's going to be much more related to the real world and much more interesting, and talks about the rules of probability, but does it in a context that you can understand. So what I did was I came up with this thing, which took me quite a while. And again, I worked with Anna on this thing because she had a project.
This is Anna Kleinbaum.
Anna Kleinbaum. This is a teaching module to teach probability, what it's all about, in terms of a realistic example. But at the end of the example, they learn about how to decide about whether two variables are independent and how the chi-square test works to do that. Even though they hadn't had test of hypothesis.
Right.
But how the chi-square test comes from a 2x2 table,
Right.
and how it's computed.
Right.
So I started off with a simple example. I have this picture over here. And I say in this picture, I say, okay,